Okay, we're back. Thanks so much for watching the presentations of our three module builders. And now David and I would like to take 10 to 15 minutes or so to talk a little bit about what we can do with this site. So how does bodies and structures represent the multivocality of space? And I phrase this in my most academic language, so what? Well, before we can, or as we get into the kind of so what and the how we do this, there are some fundamental features of the platform that we use that it helps to understand. So I'm going to start there. The platform that we built bodies and structures on is called Scalar. It was designed by the Alliance for Networking Visual Culture out of USC, and it's still available via USC. One of the key features of Scalar is that the basic unit is a page. Everything in Scalar is a page with its own unique URL. You can arrange these pages in a lot of different ways. So one of the most straightforward ways of arranging them is in a linear pathway. So you can construct narratives. And I think that our module builders showed you how they have created pathways to construct narratives in their own modules. You can also create nonlinear relationships through tags. So tags are also pages, and those pages can tag other pages. So here I've got a set of images, a set of screenshots that show an example of a page from Sakura Christmas's module that is tagged by corporation, which is one of the spatial figures that we've identified and we use as a tag throughout the site. And then you could click on that tag and go to the corporation tag page and see all of the other pages that have been tagged by corporation. And these pages, as you'll see when you explore the site, are they cover a lot of different topics, right? So you're going to get a lot of juxtapositions through this process. And then the tags can also be represented on maps. So if you tag a page that has geospatial metadata, you can also make it show up on a map. A third kind of relationship you can establish between pages is annotations. So media, you can annotate media. In this case, what Maren Ehlers has done is provide translations of various parts of this flyer vaccinating or advertising vaccination against smallpox. And then each of these annotations is also its own page. And then finally, we create hyperlinks or notes. So here we have a note on Yako Village, and you click on it, and it actually brings up the whole content from the Yako Village page in Peter Tilley's module. And you can scroll down this note, and if you wanted to, you could go to the page itself. So Scalar keeps track of all of the relationships that we've established with between pages. And then as a collective, we can arrange them in all kinds of different ways to analyze space from a multivocal perspective. So I'm going to hand it over to David now, who's going to show some examples.
So one of the things we mentioned earlier is that we're trying to get away from a spatial history that is simply reliant on the cartographic map. And the way that Scalar allows us to visualize page relationships and to develop multiple entry points for the site is one way in which we hope to achieve this goal. Again, we're looking to produce a multivocal spatial history, and so Scalar, with its the flatness of all the different pages, allows for that kind of multivocality to come forward. So we have several ways of accessing the site. One way is simply through a list of the various modules. Currently in version 1.0, there are 7 modules. In version 2.0, there will be 17 modules. And so this is kind of just a straightforward table of contents. Another way is through a complete grid visualization. Since every page in Scalar is a flat page, it constitutes a tile in a total grid. And so you can see a color-coded grid of pathway pages, regular text pages, tag pages, notation pages, and media pages. And by scrolling over it, you can see how these pages connect. The blue line signifying pathways, the red line signifying tag relationships, for example. A third way on the right is the tag map itself. So since we have created tags for various pages, we can visualize these, and you can click on a tag and then click on its subtags down to the level of the pages that are tagged, and then track out different kinds of relationships or intersections among these. Finally, or another way is the the regular Google Map widget. So basically any page that has geolocational data, metadata, can be represented on a Google Map widget, and therefore it can become a pin on a map that the site produces. And we'll talk more about each of these in a bit. And finally, lenses, which we'll come back to, but this is a new development for us that's funded by the NEH, and it's a way to enable both the authors and visitors to the site to curate information in new ways and to create new kinds of visualizations. So as I mentioned, the list of modules is essentially a table of contents, and you see here that there are currently 17 in our 2.0 list. And clicking down on each of these will open up the module, and then each module has its own table of contents with all the pathways and pages in it. So you can keep using this to drill down into any given module. The tag map, again, is a force-directed map, but you can also see a static index of all of the tags, and clicking on any of those will then bring up a page showing you what pages are tagged by that. So this is experimental, and we hope that it will be generative of new ideas by showing how different kinds of tags might intersect on pages or create clusters of pages. Some of it is more suggestive than at this point empirically demonstrable, but we're hoping that in the future this will build out to have real potential.
Mhm. And actually, I want to add in here that this is one of the ways in which the project is collaborative from the ground up. So we, as a group of 7 module builders for 1.0 and now 17 for 2.0, came up with the tags that we use to then conceptually map all of the pages in the site.
Yeah, and so the grid visualization is another way of doing this. And again, when you mouse over a tile or a page, if you click on it, you can hold it open and it will give you a little description. And so you can hold open multiple ones and then determine that you want to visit these in a certain sequence, or you want to put them together in some way and experiment with them. But it gives you a sense of the various possibilities that that the space contains.
Mm-hmm.
And the geotag map, again, this is an image from version 1.0. It's not a complete image because, in fact, some of the metadata will take you to Europe, to Berlin, for example, as well as to North America. And in version 2.0, we've built out more modules that deal with Southeast Asia and other parts of Northeast Asia. And so when you ultimately see 2.0, you will see a different set of pins, these and others.
So these entry points allow you to come into the site in via 4 ways that we've designed the table of contents, picking something based on where it is on a map, looking through the connections that a particular page has on the grid view, or starting with the conceptual approach and saying, I want to see what they have on imaginative geographies, for example, expanding that tag and then looking at some of those pages. For 2.0, though, we are introducing a totally new tool that we've developed with the team at Scalar, which allows you as a user or as a reader to actually create your own maps of the site's content. So put it together in a new way to make your own critical interventions in the site's structures, figure out what have we missed, figure out what's cool there that we didn't see, and make that visible to yourself, but also then potentially share it with us and the rest of the users of the site.
And can I just jump in for 1 second there? So Kate talked about this as a way for users to map things in different ways. And this is a crucial concept for us. We really think about mapping as wayfinding, as opposed to simply representing things on a flat cartographic image. And I think this differentiates us from a lot of sites that are GIS oriented. And so this is kind of a more phenomenological approach for people to encounter the site and encounter the space and make their way through it and make their own meanings from it, just as we hope people will be able to see how individuals and groups in the past also encountered space and place and made meanings out of it.
Yes, exactly. It's like multivocal, and then also multi-layered.
Yeah.
thinking of the site itself as a place, right? So one of the ways, here's a very straightforward example of one thing you could do with lenses. So lenses allows you to combine the site's content in new ways and then to visualize it. Or I should say, create a slice of content and visualize it. So here what we've done is we've used the word cloud visualization, and we've visualized the words that are on the pages that make up Sakura Christmas's module, Imperial Japan Up in the Air. And then we've combined that with the pages that make up Emily Chapman's module, One Family's Photographs, which is about a family album produced in Japan's early post-war period in the 1950s and 1960s. And the reason why we threw together these two modules is because they both deal with photography, but in very different ways and in very different contexts. And we wanted to see, are some of these words, some of the content overlapping? So you can see on this word cloud the kinds of words that come up. What I noticed, because I am kind of a transportation nerd, was that aviation and car are both words that come up when we talk about photography in the 20th century. So cars are not particularly visible when you're thinking about photography in Sakura's module, but they are hugely important when we're talking about photography in Emily's module. And so here's one way that you can kind of see these things together, and they encourage you to think or to rethink some of the content you may have encountered previously. A second example that we put together is an example of what we call reading across places. And this is a concept that we use, or that we articulated as a way of describing both the action and I guess the virtue of of juxtaposition. So the site allows you to like look at the same concept in a lot of different contexts, basically, and to do so rather than like, you know, putting 12 books on your shelf or flipping back and forth through a million indexes. You can just throw them all into the same page. So here we did a word cloud of all of the pages that contain the word network. And then you can also see one we did a word cloud of all the pages that contain the word move, just to see what are the other words that people use when they're talking about networks in a variety of historical periods, and ditto for the word move. And so you can see some of the things that come up, you know, in the network, right? We're talking about opium. This is a very famous network in East Asian history, but also drugstore franchises, not necessarily something that people think about a lot. Vaccination networks, right, from Marin's module. So we have, you know, as historians and scholars who work in particular time and place context, we have our own ideas of what a network is, right? But reading across places, reading movement across places and across time periods shakes us out of our kind of practiced wisdom, right? And gets us to think a little more deeply about, well, really, what is a network? What are the possibilities for this kind of spatial structure? So David?
So another way in which we can read across places is to take the same set of pages that contain network and show them as a list. And here there are 41 hits that came back on this. And so this is one portion of that. But in a list form, we can get a more granular view of each. We can get the title, we can get the description, we can get the author. We can actually, if we wanted to look at the site itself and its history, we can get who the last editor of any given page was and the version of the page. So this permits us to treat both the content and the site itself as objects of inquiry. And one of the new tools that's come along with the lenses is the inspector tool, which you see on the right of this screenshot. You can open up the inspector, and when you highlight a page in the list, it will bring up all the details about that page. So it'll give you not only the URL for the page, but also any metadata terms that have been applied to it. And as you can see here, this page actually contains a number of lat-long terms, as well as a number of place names. And so if you were to use this lens and pull up this list and then use the inspector to open up this page, you might be prompted to then copy one of the lat-long pairs into a search and create a lens based on that to see how a particular geolocation might be read across places in our site as well.
Mm-hmm. Right, you could put in the lat-long coordinates and say, give me every page that's within 50 miles of this. Yeah, let's see what's happening there.
And so another way in which we do use cartography is through the Google map and the pinning of different pages. But one of the things that we try to do with that then is to use this to evoke a sense of place and to deep map any particular location. And so an example of that would be, for example, Shanghai, where, if you zoom in, you will see that we have a number of pins on Shanghai. And if you open them up, then you can see right here that there are, in this example, there are three very different kinds of treatments of Shanghai. One comes from my module. It's about migration of women between Japan and China. Another comes from Noriko Aso's module on Mitsukoshi department store and photographs of Shanghai that appeared in that magazine, in that department store's magazine. And then one from Peter Tilley's discussion of the Jardine Matheson network in his module on opium. So again, a single place has multiple meanings and multiple histories. And this is one way in which we hope that the actual map can be used to develop that sense of place.
So what does Bodies and Structures contribute to the scholarship on spatial history, on spatial humanities, and to the study of modern East Asian history? For us, the intervention is primarily, or I should say one of the biggest interventions is ontological. It has to do with how we think about making knowledge about space, spatial history, and modern East Asia. So we find ourselves returning often to this line from Richard White's very, very famous essay, What is Spatial History? Visualization and spatial history are not about producing things that you have discovered. It is a means of doing research. It generates questions that might otherwise go unasked. It reveals historical relations that might otherwise go unnoticed. And it undermines or substantiates stories upon which we build our own versions of the past. Bodies and Structures does contain discoveries. These modules are treasure troves of close analysis of primary sources and other, important historical figures and events and infrastructures that we don't see written about very often. All of the modules contain translated primary sources that are all available through open access Creative Commons licenses. And in addition to this, these discoveries that I think you sort of got a sense of with our panelists present, with our module builders presentations, it's also a place where you can research in new ways, right? And this is the big contribution that we're making here with this site.
It's also a site where you can write in new ways. One of the things that we wanted to do with Bodies and Structures and with Scalar was to get away from the traditional linear narrative form. And so there are various digital humanities tools and projects that are out there that basically invite you in and then push you in a single direction, whether it be downward or forward. And we really wanted to get to the kind of non-linearity of spatial history. And so in addition to the tags and the notations and the pathways, there are other ways in which we encourage our module builders to think about their projects as not simply a single linear story, but as a space that can branch off in different directions, almost rhizomatically connect to other places. And while that's sort of the promise of the site, it is also a challenge because it has to be managed on the side of the editors. It also has to be managed by the user who visits. And so Paula Curtis, who kindly reviewed our site for Reviews in Digital Humanities, wrote, the at times bewildering complexity of the content of Bodies and Structures can be a hindrance for non-specialist or novice users, but it is also the point of the project. The historical actors never experience space and place in ways that do not always read as straightforward as a typical textbook or monograph might lead us to believe. It suggests that we should consider what diving deeply into these fragments and our own travels through these moments can tell us. Again, it's the phenomenological dimension of this that we think has a lot of potential.
So please come join our conversation. Take a look, if you haven't already, at the 1.0 version of the site, which is available at bodiesandstructures.org. And keep your eyes out on Twitter and HNet and elsewhere for the release of Bodies and Structures 2.0, which we anticipate finalizing in September 2021. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to write to us at bodiesandstructures@gmail.com.
We always want user feedback.
Yes. And now we will switch over to comments from our discussant, John Corrigan, and then a brief roundtable with all the participants. Thank you very much.
Thank you.